It is Friday, May 6th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello everyone, welcome back. It was a very interesting week as we had more industry consolidation, and that often leads into more rumors about industry consolidation, so that's going to be fun to go over. But first, as always, our PS Plus reminder: the May games are now live on PSN. That's FIFA 22, Tribes of Midgard, and also Curse of the Dead Gods. And also, we have our final PS Now lineup, because we know PS Now is going away. So for the May lineup, our final round of PS Now games, it's Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm 4, Soul Calibur 6, and also Blasphemous. And it should go without saying that this month and prior months where it was somewhat recent, all those games are presumably going into the new lineup as well. But the big question mark is the games that have been in PS Now for a long time. Are those going away? We still don't know just yet, or at least as I'm filming this just yet, but this is a good segue to our next story, which is the direct confirmation that Sony's blocking the stacking of PS Now and PS Plus memberships. And, we touched on this last week and also in our Tuesday video about the PS Now catalog and playing PS Now games before the changeover. I didn't want to be too verbose on the topic, but the thing is, what some people are misunderstanding about this is that you can't extend an existing membership. So if you have Plus or Now today, you can't just extend that arbitrarily, which before they used to let you do. And that means they're also blocking retail cards as well. And if you're hanging on to those retail cards, you might be concerned that you won't be able to use them, but that's not entirely true. Also, if you do have a PS Now card sitting around, then if you're not a member, that will work. That's the one little caveat, but the thing is, PS Now is the odd man out. They're getting rid of that service. So that's why on Tuesday I said, you can't actually, as far as I can see, you can't subscribe to PS Now from the console, from desktop. They're trying to cut that off entirely because that's where it grants you into premium, and that's where you can lock in a lot of savings. But if you do have a PS Now card somewhere, 3-month, 1 year, whatever, you might want to activate that now if you're not a member. That's the only way it'll work today. And yeah, there's the chance that you can go to a grocery store or something, and maybe they still have the cards lying around, and if you can activate that at a register, then go ahead and do that. It would obviously mostly be advantageous if you have banked 3, 4, 5 extra years of PS Plus, whatever your situation is. If you've got years of PS Plus banked, but you don't have Now, and therefore you're only going to get moved into Essential, yeah, then if you can find, even a 3-month PS Now card, a year card, go ahead and do it, buy it, enter it right now. That way you're locking in years of premium. Because the other thing is that if you do have those cards and you can't extend your membership right now ahead of time, it's not like you didn't lose those cards. Sony put out this chart that is kind of, a bit confusing to look at first, but it's something where they have to outline what those cards will be worth once you activate them after the changeover, because in a lot of circumstances, it's not going to be a one-for-one change. The most easy way to look at this is that if you have PS Plus or just a basic Plus membership and you activate that going into PS Plus Essential, which is basically the same thing, that's one-for-one. A year is a year, 3 months is 3 months. But if you move into PS Plus Extra, if you move into Premium, that's where a PS Now or a PS Plus card today is not going to be worth as many days because you're being given more values. That's why the breakdown is a bit strange, but that's everything. And like I said, it's a very Sony move. I still think it probably would have been best to just let people get away with this. It's not like you have millions of people doing this, tens of thousands at the most, I would say, and you can avoid all the bad press that Sony's seen throughout the past week regarding the situation. That's just my opinion, but either way, the good news was if you had years of Plus banked and you got in with PS Now, you locked in a lot of years of premium. So if you did lock that in, or if you're still trying to, good luck. That's a very good circumstance to be in. Next up, as I'm sure a lot of you are well aware, we are currently in spring, and what we were told last year was that, hey, Final Fantasy 16 is a bit behind schedule. Your next update, or we'll tell you more in spring of next year, and that's where we are. So what's going on? We do have an update. It's not quite the update I think we were expecting, but that might imply the update we want is coming very soon. So This is based on what the producer, Naoki Yoshida, said in the recent 35th anniversary Final Fantasy Uniqlo magazine, where he provided this quote. He says, "We're in the final stages of development for the new numbered game in the series, Final Fantasy XVI. We aim to deliver a comprehensive game full of story and gameplay. Unlike an online game that involves many players at the same time, FF16 offers a different experience where it focuses on the individual player and immerses you in the story. I think it's a very fleshed out story. For those that have grown up and realized that reality isn't kind to you and have drifted away from Final Fantasy, we hope that FF16 will be a game that can bring back a new passion that you once had with the series." So, that is good news. And, well, keep in mind, we don't have an idea of what the final stages means to them, because there is a big variable here of, like, it could be 3-4 months, it could be 6 to 8 months, and all that in terms of game development could be considered the final stages of development. So if we want to get technical, we have until, mid-June or whatever, until they can provide that update within spring. But really, a lot of that depends on how far that progress really is. Also, how they plan on actually showcasing the game next with a long-form trailer. Is it going to be through Square's own channels? Are they going to, partner with a third-party show like, say, Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest? Or are they going to go with Sony again, where it's on Sony's terms through the PS blog, a state of play, maybe their own specialized event? We just don't know. So it just seems like we should be hearing a new update very soon, and I'm thrilled because I don't know why, I have a lot of interest in this game in particular. It's been a while since I played a mainline Final Fantasy, so I'm eager to see more for sure. Moving on to our next news story, Sony's made another investment, this time not nearly as high profile as Epic Games, and not nearly as much money, but this time Sony's invested in AccelByte, which is a platform that provides back-end tools and services for primarily multiplayer and live service games. So in a recent round of funding, AccelByte raised $60 million between not only Sony Interactive Entertainment, but also Galaxy Interactive and NetEase. So I would assume it's $20 million between all three of them, and that's kind of not a small sum of money, but compared to what Sony spends, I mean, it's not really a whole lot. Although it does show, once again, Sony is very much committed to the live service space, which, I understand why people get so upset when they hear about this, but as we've said countless times, it doesn't mean less single player, it doesn't mean less, X, Y, and Z of whatever it is that you like about PlayStation. They're investing everywhere across the board. This is another example. And more so, we've got extra insight into their mythology on this now. Not just that, obviously live service games generate a boatload of cash, but when Sony announced the PS Plus relaunch details, this is where we got, direct quotes from Jim Ryan about, how they don't necessarily see the day and date model of Game Pass working long term. Now that might sound weird to bring up in this conversation, but in this context, he's referring to what they feel the long-term upside is those live service games, not necessarily a subscription model where you've got all these games launching day and date and it just doesn't really seem sustainable long-term. They feel that players will be highly engaged on, individual titles that they deeply care about, and that's why we see them investing so much right now. So whether you agree with it or not, at the very least, you have more context into why they are investing so heavily outside of the fact that, yes, live service games, when they hit, they are extremely lucrative. Now, the really big news this week is that Embracer Group, which we don't talk about too much, but if you've been following along, they've acquired a ton of developers and publishers in the last 3 years, which, it's not just Sony and Microsoft. It's something where we've got Sony, Microsoft, Embracer, also Tencent. There's a consolidation going around everywhere, and Embracer is one of them, and they're a big one. So recently, Embracer Group entered into an agreement with Square Enix to acquire Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal, and a catalog of IPs, including Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Thief, Legacy of Kain, and more than 50 back catalog of games from Square Enix Holdings. And in total, the acquisition includes 1,100 employees across 3 studios and 8 global locations, the total price being $300 million on a cash and debt-free basis to be paid in full at closing, which is nuts. And of course, the reaction would immediately be, okay, one, that sounds really cheap for what Embracer is getting, but two, it seems like Square is totally dropping out of the Western territory, dropping all those businesses, those developers. They just want to be done with it, which is not entirely true. They are retaining the IP to Just Cause, Outriders, and Life is Strange. But still, why would Square Enix do this? So this was explained in their press release where they say, and I quote here, "The transaction will assist the company in adapting to the changes underway in the global business environment by establishing a more efficient allocation of resources, which will enhance corporate value by accelerating growth in the company's core businesses in the digital entertainment domain. In addition, the transaction enables the launch of new businesses by moving forward with investments in fields including blockchain, AI, and the cloud." Now, that doesn't really sound all that encouraging, or at least, AI, cloud, okay, whatever. We've seen that every company wants to advance there. That makes sense to a degree. Not really exciting per se, but blockchain, of course, that's one where it's like, but either way, I wouldn't even really look too much into that because the one angle of this with the dust settling is that, okay, obviously Square wanted to get out of these developers and their Western businesses for a multitude of reasons, which by and large is kind of Square's fault for how they managed these studios over the years. We've seen that they've actually put out software that has done well, but, they come out and say, oh, it's a commercial disappointment, or it broke even, or it barely did well, the profit margin's very low, and you have to wonder, how did it get that way to begin with? What is Square really doing when it comes to managing these studios? And sure, there's a bit of that alongside the fact that some of these devs might not necessarily be in the best position right now, but it's also based on the resources and the timelines that they're given from Square Enix, right? So there's a little bit of that at play, but still, you've got very valuable talent and also very valuable IP, and so the question still stands, why get rid of this for what seems like such a low price? And that's why, comparables in this case, I mean, it's hard not to compare, right? Sony acquired Bungie for $3 billion something, or, well, really, I guess a more apt comparison would be, say, Insomniac, or, Microsoft and all their acquisitions. They acquired X, Y, and Z for this amount, right? $300 million for even just something like Tomb Raider alone sounds like a really good deal. So to get all that, it's just like, I can see where everybody's coming from, but the reality is that for Square, they just weren't really doing a good job and maintaining these studios and not having a way to really consistently make a profit with them and the projects that they put out. It's something where it seems like for a while they've wanted to really get out of this, and that's kind of been the running theory, is that because of them underperforming for so long, they've been shopping them around, and it seems like this might have been the best price that they could have got, because while it is a very low price, there is still not really much there to sell to people and say, hey, it is worth a higher price tag. And let's say it is worth a higher price tag, which I would say, yes, it is, but you don't have a buyer lined up to take care of these, to bring in these studios that still need some proper guidance. And that's why when the question comes up of, how did Microsoft not swoop in? How did Sony not swoop in, right? Well, at least for this channel and how we cover PlayStation news, we can definitely say that for Sony, they're not really in the business of rescuing developers and rescuing or acquiring IP. At least up until this point, we've seen that's not how they've done it. We say it every time there's acquisition news surrounding Sony. They have a formula. Yes, they're finally breaking a bit away from that formula, but even then with, say, Bungie, it still fit very closely where it's a partner they've worked with before. They're not hunting the IP, they're hunting the talent. Sony's not really in the business of, rescuing a bunch of developers and putting them in a much better position. It's a matter of working with a studio that they know have proven themselves and they've worked with for a long time. They feel comfortable in the investment, and they think there's a lot more upside with their resources now being given directly to that team. It's not really something where Sony wants Tomb Raider or they want Deus Ex, and they also want to fix these teams and put them in a much better position. That's not really what Sony's done before. And when this came out, I'm like, well, yeah, no surprise that Sony didn't really want these even for the price, right? Because that is the question. Why wouldn't they step in and offer $320 million or $400 million or whatever else and just pick up something as valuable as Tomb Raider? Not really I would be shocked if Sony did that. But this goes into our next story, which is the major big PlayStation acquisition that was rumored very recently. That was the one that Jeff Grubb and also Greg Miller both said that they heard. That was the 1 week where there was supposed to be three big PlayStation rumors. And if even one of them were true, that was what Greg said at the time, which we know that one of them was PS Plus, the other one was a big acquisition. Apparently it was Square Enix. The rumor that Jeff and presumably Greg Miller heard was that Square Enix was being acquired, or they were going to be acquired by Sony Interactive Entertainment. However, as we've seen time and time again with these acquisition rumors and murmurings, it's that this stuff doesn't really ever get out. And that's also why Jeff, put out there that he couldn't really pin it down. He does elaborate on this further in a sequence of tweets where he says, and I quote here, "Okay, I've said this 1,000 times, but there's always someone who is hearing it for the first time. We never really hear enough to report on acquisitions with any certainty. Sony acquiring Square was the big rumor, but I cannot confirm that, and I continue to not know. Anyway, now you know as much as I do. I do believe that Square Enix is trying to best position itself for acquisition, but that doesn't mean anything. These deals can fall through or get completely flipped on their head. That happens all the time." Which, it's true. It's something where we saw, the original rumor was Sony acquiring Square, which was a few weeks ago, and we clearly see that for Embracer, picking up all these IP and studios. We didn't have any sort of indication about that happening. We see this with Sony, Microsoft, Tencent, Embracer, everybody else. We just don't actually get acquisition rumors. It should be more well known at this point. If anything, it's really more speculation, which is fine, but real rumors don't actually happen, at the very least until day of, when the deal is about to be announced, and emails go out and more people find out about it within the company, and that's where they might send it off to a credible news source or something. But otherwise, we never really know when these things are going to happen. And in terms of Square positioning itself to the right buyer, okay, it does. It's very plausible. In fact, it's something where if you had asked me 2 years ago, before all the consolidation was really happening, of course I was saying back then, there's no way Sony would get to that point of acquiring publishers. There's no way that's going to happen. Even after Bethesda with Microsoft, I was still more I would just be shocked if Sony did that. That's not how they've gone about doing it, and also they don't necessarily have the kind of capital to just drop on something like that, which they could, but it means a lot more when Sony drops that kind of money versus Microsoft, right? So they have to be very careful about where they put that money, or if they take on a lot of debt in order to facilitate that transaction. It's just it's something where I thought there's no way that's going to happen, and now in recent months we've seen that the conversation surrounding consolidation is that for Sony, Microsoft, who's the next developer, who's the next publisher, will Sony pick up that big one? And recently I have been feeling that we might get there eventually, where Sony will pick up a really big one. And when you look at the suspects, or at least how many, there's not many options left, right? We've got Sega, Ubisoft, Capcom, EA, Square, of course. It's just not many of those really make sense. In theory, none of them make sense for Sony based on their formula and how they normally go about picking up studios. So when you look at which one seems the most viable, Square is definitely in there. And in fact, yes, it makes even more sense now if they are dropping off all these Western studios, right? Ubisoft, that would be really strange, and actually we have recent news that they don't want to be acquired. They're trying to work with a private equity firm, so the family controls that company. But there's that. EA, that would be totally weird. Sega, Capcom, okay, Sony does have a distinct advantage in that they don't have the cultural barrier of a Western studio acquiring a Japanese one, so that works to Sony's benefit. That applies to Square. But Square also they still have a lot of studios and IP where they ship outside of PlayStation, so how would Sony handle that? If they did pick them up, I think they would let them stay multi-platform, but certain things like Final Fantasy, where they are very close to that IP, that would continue to be exclusive. Perhaps, mainline Dragon Quest games or whatever else, right? There's so many ways this can go, but if you had asked me 2 years ago, I'd say no way this is happening. If you had asked me a year ago, I'd say no, there's no chance, but recently it's okay, yeah, it would make sense, actually. If after this acquisition goes through, where Embracer picks up all these teams and the IP, and then Let's say by the end of this year, if we woke up and Sony acquires Square Enix, I think I'm to a point where it wouldn't surprise me. It does make sense, but still, the price has to be right. Sony has to be willing to do it, and also Square has to want to sell. If all those stars align, it might happen. Now, speaking of acquisitions, it only seems fitting for this to be our next news story. The FTC has opened up an investigation into Sony's buyout of Bungie for $3.6 billion, which is not really surprising at all. If anything, it seemed like a given that this was going to happen. Of course, there's plenty of checks and balances and investigations that are going to happen naturally throughout this process until the transaction completes, and that's what we're seeing with Microsoft. And really, there is going to be a lot more scrutiny with all these deals as they become more and more commonplace. For this example, I don't anticipate any sort of issue. It's not really something that is alarming on the surface. And that's also why, even for Microsoft, right now, Wall Street in particular is feeling a bit uneasy that the deal won't go through, but all the shareholders were overwhelmingly in agreement to go ahead and sell. And even right when that acquisition happened, I just thought to myself, like, I don't see how this doesn't go through, because immediately it's like, oh, antitrust, monopoly, this, that, and the other, right? Like, oh, well, let's settle down for a second. That's probably going to go through just fine. And so to a much lesser extent, this should also go through for Sony, no problem. But we're going to be seeing a lot of these headlines as, again, more acquisitions get announced. Now, moving on to our next news story, the PS5 stock situation is not getting much better at all, as we've seen in recent months with PS5 sales, and it seems like it's going to be a while or even longer until it gets better. Originally, we had a lot of analysts and quotes kind of positioning 2023 as being the year that it would finally pick up and demand would be met. But recently, as reported by CNBC in a recent interview, from TechCrunch, which this was with the Intel CEO, Pat Gelsinger, he mentioned that it seems like it could possibly slip into 2024 based on the equipment actually making the semiconductors that is now turning into a bottleneck, where he says, and I quote here, "That's part of the reason that we believe the overall semiconductor shortage will now drift into 2024 from our earlier estimates in 2023, just because the shortages have now hit equipment and some of those factory ramps will be more challenged." Somewhat ironic that is now going to be the new bottleneck, actually getting a lot of these production lines online, which is the machines themselves that make the chips, and thus getting all these orders fulfilled to all these clients that have, for the past 2 years now, have been really struggling to get their demand met. And for Sony, it's been really weird to see how that they had such a strong allocation to begin with. And granted, a lot of that seems to just fall on Sony starting manufacturing sooner, but still, they just can't really get many of these things made. And then there's so many other bottlenecks too, like just getting them shipped, sent overseas, and getting them actually in stores, and then seeing how stores are handling it. It's just been a mess for 2 years. But even with Sony doing seemingly the worst, we are seeing that Nintendo and Microsoft both have forecasts putting their hardware down for the next quarter, or at least for Nintendo, I think they said for the next year. But we're actually going to get Sony's fiscal report very soon. In fact, we might actually do a separate video on that, going over any sort of revised forecast, or at least whatever sort of numbers they put out based on what they say. We might have a discussion there, but it does seem like there's a big problem that is not going to be alleviated anytime soon. And bear in mind, this is the Intel CEO, but he's speaking more broadly on the semiconductor market, because obviously PS5 and Series S and X have AMD hardware inside. But the point is that it's he's speaking more broadly on the entire market. That would be really disappointing, especially when you consider that by 2024, the consoles will have been in the market for 3 full years, nearly 4 if, say, by the end of 2024, it's still not that good, but we will in theory be at least a third or possibly up to halfway through this console cycle, although maybe a third. I expect the cycle to be quite long, but be that as it may, that's a problem, that you still cannot confidently walk into a retail store and just buy a PS5 whenever you want. That reality is slipping further and further away. Next up, Jeff Keighley has confirmed the date and times for the Summer Game Fest 2022. It's June 9th, which for me that would be 2 p.m. ET, but it'll also be 6 p.m. GMT or 11 a.m. PT. And as we've seen in prior years, there is the very real possibility that we could see major announcements, especially without E3 this time, although we are going to see publishers doing their own thing as well. And Microsoft also confirmed their showcase very close as well, so that's exciting. And with Sony, we know they're the odd man out here where they could very well do different state of plays. They could do a proper showcase, which that might be more for September, if that's kind of a safe guess. But, you know, there's nothing stopping them from providing 1 or maybe 2 trailers for this. We could also see, you know, timed exclusives or whatever announced here. So there's definitely the chance that something cool shows up, and regardless of the situation, I'm still excited and optimistic, or at least I try to be most of the times. But June 9th, Summer Game Fest 2022. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus. The weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was looking at PS Now before it goes away, basically. So the catalog, streaming, playing some PS3 games, checking out some weird things that are happening on the PS5 UI, and like I said, we might look at the Sony fiscal report in a separate video. That, and we're also still waiting for the PS Plus relaunch, which is very soon, and of course we'll have coverage on all that. But until then, that is it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.